This is a Socialist News and Views special interview.
I'm Nick Schillingford, coming to you from the Urban Cabin Studios in South Minneapolis with this special interview. So on Socialist News and Views, we let people introduce themselves. You've been on the show before. Do you want to just tell the audience who you are?
Yeah, who am I? It's a good question. Well, I lived in Minneapolis for 48 years, and but I lived all over the place before that. As a kid, I moved all the time. I taught history and ethnic studies for 30 years in the Twin Cities as an adjunct. I was an activist in the 1980s around Central America. That was sort of how I began being active in any kind of way. And I've always been interested only in history as it for what it can teach us about how we can change the world today. That's
right.
Not interested in it as a chess game.
Absolutely, that's
had to deal with a lot of those kinds of people, in graduate school. So
super important. And then now you've been traveling around and you've been writing this column.
So October 2023, left Minneapolis, and I've been thinking about the title of sort of perpetual foreigner, because not really a tourist, not an immigrant, not an expat, certainly, but staying in places long enough to kind of not be a tourist, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that kind of brings me to my
enough not to be a foreigner. So,
that kind of brings me to my first thing. The part one of the Aging on the Run column. That's the new column, newish column. I mean, it's a few months now, but at the Minnesota Women's Press that you've been doing. And I know that in that part one, you were talking about returning to Minnesota. I think that was after you had been doing the traveling around the world thing for a year at that point. And I was just wondering if you'd talk a little bit about you said you were in Minneapolis for 48 years, I think you said, and your kind of complex relationship with how you view Minneapolis and Minnesota that you write about in there. Can you talk about that a little bit briefly?
Complex. Well, as I said, I went to graduate school and did the adjunct thing, and a lot of the complexities, and as an activist too, a lot of the complexities have to do with my relationship with universities and always loving teaching, always hating administrations, and accumulating lots of frustration about those kinds of things.
Well, you were here 48 years, so there must have been something. Yeah. I've been here 13 years now. It does kind of creep up on you, but not 48 years. Yes. Something was keeping you here. You must like something, some things about Minneapolis.
Well,
what are they?
I met my partner, and I had my child, and I found that Minneapolis is a place that it is big enough that you can kind of recreate yourself. And I did that several times.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I started as a dance. I came there to dance, and became an activist, and then went to school.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I appreciate your activism.
Yeah.
Well, I always think of Minneapolis as a small town city, but previous to that, I was doing a little bit of organizing in River Falls, Wisconsin, which is even smaller. It's a college town. So then when I came to Minneapolis, I was kind of feeling, like you said, like, okay, this is bigger. Like, I'm in a bigger pond. I don't know what all is going on here.
And, I went to high school in Madison, and I always felt like I couldn't go back there because
Sure.
there I couldn't recreate myself. I couldn't sort of move
Yeah.
from one to the other.
No, and that can
Uh,
be super important
yeah,
to move to. I mean, it's kind of like sometimes it's recreating yourself as much, it's like, I mean, it's maybe for the world around you, but it's mostly for yourself. That
right,
you're kind of like you can become a different person than the person that you were.
right.
Um and another big thing last time we spoke on the podcast, we were discussing your great book, Allegiance to Winds and Waters, Bicycling the Political Divides of the United States. Um you talk about that bike ride a little bit in the part one, and then in part two of Aging on the Run at MN Women's Press, you have a title Against Forgetting, where you discuss different countries and how they
Yeah,
process trauma. And you should talk about that. But I also wonder, just thinking back on your own recent past, specifically from the time of like writing the book, Allegiance to Winds and Waters, to now, are there new things that you've realized, about yourself, about that experience of riding the bike, or like why you think these experiences are so important, why you push yourself outside of your
yeah,
comfort zone? Sometimes that's hard to do, but you seem to have done it at least two very significant times that have been public. So
yeah. Well, I like to escape. It's an
well,
antidepressant for me.
that's
To
good.
be honest. Yeah, but I do want to say that
Yeah.
I'm very glad that I did the bike trip before I tried to go around the world, because I think it's very important to understand, your own society, and not that, a lot of parts of the United States seem very, very different from
Mm-hmm.
Minneapolis, but but I did live a lot of places when I was a kid too. But I think understanding things like, monocrop economies and the way in which capital comes in and ravages a place and then leaves and that kind of thing. And it actually, it's one of the things you really see on a bicycle, in ways that you might not if you're going on the freeway. And so I'm really grateful for that because I'm constantly thinking, oh, this is like South Carolina. This is like
Mm,
Louisiana, this is
sure.
like
Yeah.
Minnesota. Um, this is like the Iron Range. Yeah, I recognize this. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important. So I don't, the last essay I was talking about Sri Lanka, which in terms of which we where we just were, and
Sure.
especially in February, it's very, very different from, February in Minnesota, but
Yeah.
and it's a very poor country and also a very lush country, geographically,
Mm,
and feels very different in a lot of ways, but lots of it is the same in terms of
yeah.
the struggle against plantation agriculture, plantation economies,
Yeah.
and the way in which people try to, um, for Sri Lanka, the key is tourism. They want to
Hmm.
bring new money in. That's true all over the United States as well,
Yep.
lots of places. So,
Yeah, I mean it's
anyway,
very similar. You're talking, with the monocropping and the coming in and
right, right,
extracting all you can and then leaving, and
right,
then maybe someone else comes in to extract something else. The same thing
yeah,
you're seeing with across the United States. The same thing you're seeing
right,
around the globe. In
right,
fact, they've done a lot of this around the globe for a long time, and then they're continually bringing more of that. It's especially with Trump now. Drill baby drill and cut baby cut, and he definitely wants to
right,
bring a lot more of that resource extraction back to
right,
extract resources from our national parks and other places. So it's pretty I've kind of decided I'm definitely happy. I'm happy in Minneapolis. My plan is to stay in Minneapolis, and then as far as like traveling and stuff, I think my plan is to mostly try to see parts of the United States and even the Midwest, because there's so much stuff here that nobody
oh,
ever sees. And like even people that come from far, like I was just talking to somebody from Indianapolis today, and I was like, "Oh, have you been down to Terre Haute to the Eugene Debs house and whatever?" And they're like, "Wait, what? There's a Eugene Debs?" And I was like, "Yeah," and they have a whole repository of his documents at the
yeah,
university, whatever. There's so much stuff even in the Midwest that nobody knows about. I actually would
Yeah,
like to put together some kind of a guidebook of like, lefty
that
or
would be
labor sites kind of in the Midwest or some portion of the Midwest. I think would be neat because there's so
and then
much stuff and you don't know about it.
you can do
So
tours.
exactly, yeah. Maybe I could set up. I could set up tours. Um, yeah, I guess a little. How are some of those places dealing with their trauma? What did you see as far as far as that goes? This historical trauma,
Well,
sometimes
I
from the
think a
U.S.
good
or
example is what we just went to visit here in South Korea a couple days ago. Uh, this is what they call the 4-3 Peace Park, which is because there was a massacre that the United States was in charge
Mm,
of people who lived here on Jeju Island in 1947 on April 3rd was the main time, and so they call it the 4-3 Peace Park.
mm,
And there was in 2000 there was a sort of a truth and reconciliation process, and they decided they were going to create this park, and the government apologized in Korea, but not the United States.
right.
But so it's very interesting because the park is, I mean, it's huge, and there are 3 buildings on it, and there are 4 different kinds of cemetery. There's the tombstones. There's a wall like the Vietnam
Mm,
Wall, similar. It goes around forever and ever. It really gives you that feeling of just the volume of people who were killed.
mm,
And then there's a kind of a mausoleum where you can go in and you see the names, and you can put flowers, and you can write your message and everything. And so since 2000, they've had several different regimes, and they've wanted to hide it again. But
oh,
here
okay.
now, they want to hide it again, but what do? Because they have created all this marble, right?
Right.
It's not a piece of plastic, like it's not a a bulletin board like George Floyd Square is right now. I mean,
Yeah.
and so I was thinking about how the importance of that, and the
Yeah.
importance of something that you cannot take down.
Right.
So the buildings, we got there and we wanted to go in the buildings, and they were closed. And there's
Mm,
a promise. I saw the article that on April 3rd, they will be opening those buildings.
mm,
There's a museum that we wanted to see. Um, and they will be making it so that, all of it was 30,000 people were killed. 100,000 were incarcerated this is a small island. I
right.
think it's everybody, in concentration camps. The idea was that this was a hotbed of, support for communism, and it didn't, whether it was or wasn't, I'm not clear. I
Right.
don't know. I haven't learned that yet.
Right.
But I just thinking about in terms of the importance of these stories, and the way in which there's always a backlash, right? And
Hmm.
how do you protect against a backlash? I mean, we've seen in the United States, right? We created Martin Luther King Day, which
Right.
I always argued with my students was still important, even when it was, even when people, there were years and times when it got subverted, and
I mean, people fought for it,
right, the story changed, but it's there to be reused,
Right.
right. There's always those stories, and so I think this, whether it's a day, whether it's a memorial, whether and as established as you can possibly make it, it's really, really important to sort of um, uh, to
Make sure they
protect.
can't bury it as
They can't.
easily, at least.
Yeah, yeah. But at the same time, what I don't, what I've been thinking a lot, because the whole time I've been traveling, of course, the siege of Gaza has been going on
Hmm.
exactly the same time. And as a Jew and a the child of a Holocaust refugee, I think about the abuses of history all the time, in the way in which people, remember things in ways that um, justify genocide,
Right.
right? Um, so, uh, so it's I have a really hard time with this writing, because people like to have you have all the answers, and I feel like
Right.
I have more and more questions the more I think about it. Um,
I'm
I've
thinking more.
enjoyed,
I'm thinking more and more. That's good. But
yeah,
having questions is good. Thinking you have all the answers is
right,
bad
right,
usually,
right.
because I'm pretty sure nobody does. So
Use it as a way to not take any action, right?
right.
That's the secret.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think the secret sauce to taking action is connecting with other people in some form or another, and that helps you to figure out what that action is. But when you're
yeah,
just by yourself, it's kind of
right.
harder to get the full picture of what's going on, So that's my
Yeah.
take.
Right.
But yeah, so well, that's really interesting. Yeah, sometimes the regime or the powers that be overreact, and they get paranoid, and they come in, and it's not a hotbed of communism. And then
Mhm.
sometimes they come in because it actually is a successful
Yeah.
area where people are able to organize for
And
a
I
new
think
system, a new
here
way.
is some kind of combination
Sure,
of the
sure.
people who were active. There were people who weren't. They got swept up, but the reaction was just horrendous in terms of
Right.
what the United States did here. Um,
They have that
Coming
history a lot of
on the
places.
heels of on the heels of the occupation by Japan. So, um, but the other thing is, so recently we were in Egypt, right?
Mm,
And there's a lot of sort of analysis of, well, that they overthrew their dictator, and at the moment have something that most people agree is worse.
hmm.
So then the question becomes, well, should we have just not done anything, right?
Right.
And I guess my take on that is that it's really wrong to think of the process as being over,
Hmm.
um, or that people aren't still learning from those lessons. Because like in Sri Lanka, they just overthrew their corrupt
Right.
dictator, and they're still in the throes of things
Worse.
looking good. No,
Looking
things
good.
looking
Okay. I was like, it's not
better.
such.
They have a president now, that everybody says he's not a thief.
Mm, well, hey, that's
And
probably good.
that's well,
It's
yeah.
a low bar, but it's good.
Yeah. Um, but people are feeling quite hopeful.
Well, that's good.
But and also it was just interesting to see, young people feeling very, very empowered.
Nice.
Yeah, we did this. You know,
Super important.
yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
keep telling people the George Floyd uprising isn't over. Like, I mean,
No,
that had
exactly,
global ripples, and those ripples,
exactly.
even if it seems like it's a lull in the United States, those ripples are still rippling, and you can
Oh,
see it in
absolutely,
art and culture and talk amongst
absolutely.
activists all over the globe. So it's
Yes, yes,
pretty amazing.
yes.
Have you seen anything? Have you run into any of that?
Absolutely. Yes,
What?
I have not met anybody who said, "Who's George Floyd?" Everybody knows who he is.
Yep.
And I use that to try to, where are you from? I'm from
Right.
Minnesota. I say it's near Canada, in the middle. And have you heard of George Floyd? Yes, of course.
Mm,
Yes.
fantastic.
Which is amazing. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, those are the things we need to be using to connect with people, is those, stories of struggle that people can
right.
like immediately connect with, or the right people can.
It opens up the conversation.
Yeah. Well, so you've been spending a month in each of these places, and or so, something like that. And I know your third installment was kind of focused on discussing the best place for aging. Do you want to? Do you want to? I liked that because it was like, kind of made me feel like upbeat, like, oh, there's some things we can do that maybe would be, we could look to and find some new ways to do things. So where was the best place, or where are the best places you've found? And have you found any new places since you wrote that in January? What are the best places to age?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think this is generally, there are specifics for when you get older, but they're
Sure.
also just in terms of, all of us human beings, the need for public spaces, the need for, here, uh, we're about a quarter mile from the water. And
Mm,
whereas there, on one side of the water, it's commercial, but the ocean is all public.
mm,
And it is used by people of all ages. There are these, the workout machines on
mm.
basically every third of a mile or so.
Oh,
There are these old people who gather around, 2 in the afternoon and work on the machines together, and then take a walk and then go. Yeah,
nice.
I've been watching that. But in contrast, Egypt, it was just there was just no public space. There was no
Mm,
place to walk. There was no place to be safe, even crossing the street. They didn't
sure.
have crosswalks. They didn't have. So anyway,
So
it
that
was
did
just
that feel pretty confining then, or is
it
that
was
how? Yeah,
horrible. It
yeah.
was horrible for me, and I'm still pretty able, but
Mm. And then I
I
remember Spain, I think, was one that you had mentioned a little bit at one point.
yes.
Is that still a pretty good contender?
Yes, yes, Spain's way up there. Yeah.
They had a lot of stuff in the parks
In
and stuff
general,
too.
but Madrid was a
Madrid,
very
okay.
progressive town
Well,
in
that's
terms,
awesome.
yeah, in terms of the social supports,
Yeah. I mean,
Social
I
support.
think we can
What
definitely
do
learn
you
some
need when
things.
you're starting to get isolated, when your
Right.
body is, you need the social supports to be able
Right.
to still be a part of society, and you can just see that.
I mean, if
Um,
people don't want, pie in the sky political ideas, I mean, and they want something really concrete, we can look at some of these places and say, hey, right? Like we should be making this case, hey, this place is doing this and it's working really great. Maybe that's a good reason to try it out and see if it might work. I was watching one documentary that talked a little bit about Singapore and some of the stuff they were doing, especially for like the aging population. They had the same kind of thing, like little stations, little bars, and other things for like people to do workouts stuff on. And they also had a program where, because they have they have a bunch of public housing there too, I guess. And they had a program where if you were going to be able to move like closer to your family member, I think it was for parents and their children. Like either way, you would get like a significant discount on your housing, some amount per month to move closer to them so that you guys could be, support for each other more. And I guess they'd had a lot of takers on that, not that surprisingly. And I thought that was a pretty cool, that's a pretty
that's
cool one. So, um, yeah, I was just gonna finish up. We just had International Women's Day, and you had Aging Across Borders 4 vignettes for International Women's Day. What was your favorite section in there as far as the focus on this International Women's Day piece, or women workers of the world?
Yeah, that was just learning about some of our ideas about what is women's work, and what women did in the 19th century, and how
Yeah.
women miners in the 19th century, highly exploited. Um,
Yep.
let's not make it sound,
The Welsh miners, right? Yeah. That was the
but
section I thought was.
yeah, and just seeing that whole the dynamic of which I see here in South Korea. There are these women who do the diving
Mm,
for shells, um, and I just learned that the reason that they're women is because it used to be women and men, but then with the military service, you
mm,
really need to train, and when the men went off to to the military, the women were, and during the war, the women kind of took it over, and now it's all exclusively women. A lot of the literature says the women are all old. I've seen lots of older women, but I've also seen younger women. So people are still doing it.
You said diving for abalone shells?
Yes, so you have to hold your breath. No, they don't use
Sure, apparatus or anything, sure.
they hold their breath and go under for a minute and get the shell out. It's very dangerous because if you the
And what's
timing
the
is
main goal of getting the shell? What is it a
it's to
food?
eat.
Okay, yeah. I was thinking that. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't for
And
something
we've
else.
had them and they are really, really good.
Oh yeah, okay. So,
Like a clam, but it's just a little feels a little more substantial than a clam.
sure, sure, sure. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. But what I wanted to say is that there's a line between, celebrating workers
Mm,
and ignoring the struggles, right?
right.
So we saw that in Portugal with the sardine. Um, that's their primary product, right? The sardine factory workers who were
Okay.
lots of parts of that industry were exclusively women,
Mm,
uh, and the workers, and they have all these statues now, sort of celebrating that work. Um, but it's important to celebrate workers and at the same time not gloss over, uh, you know, the exploitation. So that's what I've been thinking about with that, and I think that that's an issue here as well. There is a lot of the UNESCO actually has said that these women are a heritage site, which is very strange, I think. Um, um, and people seem to feel real good. We've been walking and watching them, and they will wave at us. You know, they seem to like the. I was
oh,
wondering.
sure.
I don't want to take a photo. Like it's just
Right.
not. But but they're superstars, so and they're super women, right?
Well, that's cool. I
Be
mean,
able to do so. Um, but so they're being celebrated, but I don't know how much they're getting paid now. I don't know.
right, 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 right.
So there's a difference between, elevating workers, celebrating them. I saw that in San Luis Obispo, California, with the Chinese railroad workers. They put up, they made this beautiful statue celebrating these workers. It's a major train, station there.
Mm,
But there wasn't an analogous, museum where you could learn about the exploitation or
right,
the workers who didn't
right.
survive fast and who never got paid and all of those things. So I've been thinking about that. Just, how do you um, elevate and celebrate workers without pretending there's no exploitation.
Right. Or like glorifying struggles that are
Horrifying,
like not
right?
even really that. There's nothing really glorious about them. Yeah.
Right. And maybe this work should not have been,
Right.
like in Wales, it should not have been done by children and women,
Yeah.
right? And
Well, yeah,
so,
I put out right at my special. I have a holiday special report at the end of the year every year, and my holiday special report this last year, I did an interview with my mom and my dad because so my first Christmas after I was born, they
I
went to
love that. That
yeah
was
they went to
wonderful.
give presents to the Welsh miners, and so they're Welsh miners' children, and so they had me stay with this lady that everybody in the town said, oh, she'd be great to watch your kid or whatever. So they were like, okay, but they didn't really know her, and I was only however many months old, and it's like okay, yeah, sure, sure it'll be fine. So yeah, kind of funny, and but yeah, it's easy to like glorify stuff. I was also just watching right before this, I think it's a BBC docu series And they were just talking about like women in the Russian Revolution and about how a lot of their stuff was like written over by a lot of the men that then were like taking power. And just there was one thing they were reading about the secretaries in this office, like right before this, the Russian Revolution, saying that they thought there was going to be a revolution, and one of the leaders, he wasn't one of the ones I'm most familiar with, but he ended up being one of the leaders within the Bolsheviks or whatever. He said, "Oh no, 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 you guys don't understand anything about revolutions or whatever." And then it's like, and then they were right. A couple of days later, all this stuff is happening, and so anyway, yeah, I mean, women, especially within these things too, often get like either given a secondary seat, a back seat to the men, or they're not even remembered at all. And a lot of times, not only were they involved, they were the ones leading the thing, because they were able to I was also talking about the role the women played in the Russian Revolution, talking the military people out of like shooting them or whatever, and how instrumental they were in that. But anyway, yeah, well, I really like the column, and I've been really enjoying following along on the journey. It's been really neat. I guess that was the end of my like prepared questions, but I guess I just thought of one other thing. I was curious, like, you're kind of traveling around. What are people saying about this Trump stuff from outside the US? Because I'm here in the US, and I don't know, everybody's
Yeah.
like having their own like weird reactions, from like trying to pretend it's not happening to like like kind of sort of overreacting in a non-helpful way. Or like, I don't know, what are you hearing out there?
Yeah.
Anything interesting?
Well, I think the same kind of propaganda, the same kinds of division of, the information sources is everywhere. So I have met some people who I met some very, some young, really smart people who thought Trump was really cool, and
Okay.
women in Egypt, who also support their dictator. And because, what I've heard people say is, oh, he's a good businessman, so he can bring, and also America for Americans, and we need that. We need Egypt for Egypt. So
Sure.
I am trying. I don't know the source that they're getting that from, but you
Right.
can hear that it's all. And then the people who will tell you, you've got an insane person on you.
Right.
So you hear both, and but the fact that you're hearing from, people who are really smart,
Right.
this rhetoric and propaganda that's a little that's been disturbing.
Yeah.
From and from working class people, people who don't yeah. So I think, yeah, there is that same kind of two or many different little bubbles of
Right.
information that people are getting from the big thing happening here in South Korea. There's, the president was impeached. He was in
Right.
jail. He just got out of jail last week, and his trial is going on now. And there have been competing rallies, for and against him. And the rally for him, the people carry U.S. flags as
Oh,
well as, so it's, just dotted with U.S. flags, which is interesting right there in
right.
itself.
Yeah, it's interesting to know this stuff, to get this stuff like firsthand.
Yeah, and then, but just the massive way in which people are coming out, as I said, both for and against, but the plan preemptively is to not have anything be open in Seoul. What the decision is, because they know that there's going to be such a big reaction. So I've been, thinking, and in Sri Lanka, 1 million people came out to overthrow their dictator, 3 years ago, and that's at 1/20th of the entire country. It's only
Right.
20 people in the country, so trying to imagine that in terms of what, the numbers that would be analogous in the United States, but also
Right. It would be huge.
really quite, yeah, it would be huge, but if it was state by state, that would be
Right.
kind of, you'd see that happening, yeah.
Yeah, I remember covering the Sri Lankan situation at one point, and now it's kind of not really in the Western media. I've been focusing more on the, Bangladesh, young people and what's going on there. Every so often, something will pop up. But unfortunately, Trump's face is just like on every news story around it. That's what he does when he floods the zone, is he puts his face on everything. It's part of
But
his tactic, I think.
is, yes, so there's a lot of focus in the United States, but then also there's a lot of, there are ways in which people, nations are working with each other without the US at
Right,
all.
right.
I just found out about this meeting here in Jeju Island, this organization called Northeast Asia Region. And I'm
Okay.
just, I don't know, I can't tell you that much about it because I don't know, but I'm
Right.
just so intrigued by it because it's South Korea, North Korea, Japan, China, and Russia. And
Oh,
it's not the nations, and Mongolia and Vietnam
okay.
and Kurdistan. And it's not the national governments, it's regional governments, it's
Oh,
cities. And they have this, they've been meetings for several decades. And I mean, I can immediately come up with a kind of agenda they ought to talk about because um, uh, yellow dust that has covered the region recently, all of
mm,
those countries, all that, there are issues of infrastructure. There are all kinds of ways in which they could um, cooperate, and they
right.
are. And did you know that? I didn't know that.
I
I
didn't
didn't know
really
that.
know.
Know that South and North Korea could be in the same meeting. I didn't know that
Right.
Japan and China and Russia could be in the same. I mean, that they're, I think that's pretty fascinating.
No.
And to other places, Sri Lanka, they're negotiating with everybody.
Okay.
China, Russia, everybody. United States, anybody who,
Sure.
United Arab Emirates, whoever will talk to them, right?
Right.
Mhm. So, whereas we have these fears of influence and, you don't know, whatever, you get out of that and you see, we got off the plane in Egypt and you saw all these pictures of the Chinese leader and the
Mm.
Egyptian leader together.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, so, um, meetings between African leaders and uh, anyway, there was a student I met in Sri Lanka who was a foreign student from Oman going to school in Sri Lanka. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, who would have thought? So there's all kinds of things happening that you could imagine a world in which the United States is not as powerful, and it's
Right.
happening.
Right.
And that, for someone who has studied Latin American history, and it'd be a good thing
Right.
for the United States not have that kind of power, and for people to find ways, especially not, ways not
Diplomatic ways.
well, diplomatic ways between regional
Right.
sectors.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's super cool.
Thinking about water,
Right.
thinking about, how we all survive, right? I mean,
Hmm.
just these national borders make absolutely no sense, right?
No, it's
And
true.
and, and the natural world tells us that all the time. So,
Absolutely does. Yeah.
seeing it happening is pretty cool.
It is. Yeah. I mean,
Certainly under
I'm
my
really an urbanist.
radar,
And
right?
what was that?
I said under my radar. I didn't know. I
No,
didn't
yeah.
know.
I mean, yeah. Every time I listen to if I'll, because I have to listen to English language news. If I listen to stuff in Australia and New Zealand, like news and stuff, I'll hear about different meetings and stuff that I would
Yeah,
have never
yeah,
imagined, never knew were happening, or like how much business they're doing with China and, all these different, yeah, it's interesting to hear all that stuff and realize that all the stuff is going on when, in the US, you're supposed to think that Donald Trump is like the center of the universe or something like that. And that's not the case. So, well, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything I didn't cover or anything else you want to say before you go? All right. Well, I appreciate that. It's great to continue following along, and I wish you well, and I hope to hear all about more of what you experience in South Korea as things develop there.
Okay, great. I would love to interview you. I want to know what's happening there, but I'll,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
We'll do that.
So,
We should do
yeah,
that too sometime. Take
okay.
care.
Take
Have a good
care.
day.
Great to
Bye.
see you.
Good to see
Bye-bye.
you as well. And that's our special interview. Solidarity.
This has been a Socialist News and Views special interview.